Hello and welcome to the Conversations on Global Education. I'm Michael Stevenson, I'm Vice President of Global Education at Cisco Systems, and we're in New York, and I'm joined today by Ameeta Wattal and by Yong Zhao, and we'll be talking over the next few minutes really about what's brought us together here in New York City. This is the Global Education Leaders Program. We're working with 4 major jurisdictions, New York, Victoria in Australia, the UK, and Ontario in Canada, talking about what we call Education 3.0 and how to make it happen. What is Education 3.0? Well, what we see around the world today is a lot of school systems which have been working very hard and in much the same way for 15 years to perfect what they do, whether that's about core standards of teaching and learning and making sure that the curriculum's strong, helping teachers get better and leaders get better at what they do, and putting in place accountability, metrics. How do we all know that school systems are doing what they're doing? Trouble is, it looks like that's all running out of steam, and we need something sharper for the 21st century, where teaching and learning changes. It's all about helping young people to work on collaborative problems, real-world problems, using digital media. It's about equipping teachers for that challenge, and rethinking, therefore, all the other parts of the school ecology to support it, including new technologies, the collaborative, the communication technologies, the technologies of our time. So that's what we've been talking about, and we're going to take that on a little over the next few minutes. So Ameeta is principal of Springdales School in Delhi. She's one of the leading educators in India today, and by the by, she's also a leading expert in Renaissance art. On my right is Yong Zhao. He's Distinguished Professor at the College of Education at Michigan State University. He's also Director of the US-China Center for Research and Education Excellence. And he's perhaps at the heart of the remarkable transformation that's going on right now in Chinese education. So I do feel like I'm surrounded by people who know this story. But let's begin maybe with you, Ameeta. What's your take, very briefly, on the education challenges of our time?
I think to understand education in the world today, 21st century education that we're talking about, it is very important to foster a worldwide vision for education in a multicultural world. And how do we do that? Because we have to identify emerging trends, understand what are the critical uncertainties that are going around. We also have to see that more and more the nature of education is becoming very different. There is more dependency on global languages. There is a huge explosion of information technology. And how do we utilize that within the system? And how do we create a situation where schools are not only centers of excellence, but they become laboratories where one comes to terms with, understands, and even executes the whole idea of sustainable development, gender sensitivity, a sort of an empathetic listening, social justice. I think these are very integral to what education should be, because it is a question of lifelong learning. And the whole concept of thinking skills, life skills, social skills, all these have to become an integral part of the education system.
Perfect. Yong, how does that sound to you? And in particular from this double perspective that you occupy, the US education system, but also with an eye on the Chinese.
Well, I think actually one of our biggest challenges around education is brought about by globalization and the very close and quick connection between education and economical skills. I think now every country is almost very aware of how to prepare students to compete in the 21st century in the global economy. Therefore, we have reduced the definition of education to a number of skills that we can define. So we're reducing our students into economical beings, not like really human beings. So schools, I really worry, have become a lot of times institutions or like training institutions. And that's the biggest problem. We basically have taken the education out of education, in a way trying to compete with other people. So that's really a big concern. Of course, second big concern, I think, is about how do you really help people to understand Indians and Chinese are not job robbers of Americans or England at the same time, but that's the fact that Indians and Chinese are cheaper, and there's 1.1 billion, 1.3 billion, and 2.4 billion is enough to get all the jobs away from Americans, actually including Brits. But how do you prepare people to coexist peacefully and still be able to make a living and like each other. That's I think, two big challenges.
They are, but let me take the first. I mean, you're almost talking about turning education into a factory.
Exactly.
And yet one of the great themes of our time, Ameeta, has been personalisation of education. And I'm very interested to know how you see that opportunity, and in particular whether you think it's achievable in India and what it would look like.
Well, I think that the way we're looking at, because you must be knowing that there's a huge change happening in the way we're looking at education, because we believe that children shouldn't just become absolutely obsessed with the whole issue of marks, only get obsessed with employability, though that's a very important part, especially of a nation which has a certain problem with economic problem, and children need to get jobs. But there has to be a sort of involvement in, we talk about, as Yong said, moving in from a situation from alienation to collaboration, where we do sort of cooperative work together. And I think this is achievable because we have to create spaces for children where they can sort of connect with the written word or the spoken word or mathematics or whatever it is that they're connecting to. But at the same time, there is a certain humanizing element which allows them to go beyond that space and leapfrog from that sort of learning space into a human space. And perhaps technology can help in certain ways, and of course the human face can help in that. And I think it is very achievable because the entire demography of the world is changing. As Yong said, in about 20 years, there will be something like 30.8% people in India who will be below the ages of, who will be between the ages of, say, about 5 and 20. Mm-hmm. And so it is very imperative to see where do these people go and what are the spaces they're going to occupy in a global context.
It's interesting, that idea that technology, far from automating education and depersonalizing it, actually using the new tools could make it more vivid and individualized. But here we are from our different perspectives, and yet we come together at the Global Leaders Education Programme, and really we see the opportunity for a global way forward. And that's more than all countries going off in this direction together and having nice conversations from time to time. It's actually about seeing it as a global project that we all drive forward together. The words are great. What's actually achievable in practice, do you think? What would this look like if it were to be a really global program for educational transformation?
I think the most important thing is a belief in the fact that learning has to have a level of intimacy. I don't know whether that is, how to sort of rephrase that, but the subtext is that learning can happen in intimate zones. A zone may be huge, but ultimately it's intimacy that creates celebration. It's that creates learning or festivals or anything which is joyful. And intimacy can happen amongst people who are like-minded. Who, by like-minded, I don't mean that they don't have a difference of opinion, but at least that they hook on to a sort of a collective universal consciousness. Mm-hmm. And that is what creates intimacy. So if we can create a global curriculum, it doesn't matter whether it's going to be somewhere maybe 50 years down the line, but the point is it doesn't matter whether it has to be a 3.0 as you talked about, or any other. It's not the name that matters. What matters is what makes up that curriculum. And as I explained, if there is an element of an understanding of the other, an understanding of cultures, of civilizations, and if that can be incorporated into learning, a teacher maybe in Boston can understand what's happening in a village in India and connect it with what may happen, or of how her children should sort of look at that perspective and feel a certain sense of empathy with what things are in learning. I think that itself is the crux of a global concept of education.
Yong, your sense of what a global construct of education would be?
Well, I think definitely, as you said, rightly so, that technology is really not necessarily a dehumanizing factor. It actually brings people, it brings the kind of intimacy that Ameeta is talking about. But I think also more broadly, you think about a global agenda for education is number one, one, we have to respect and celebrate individual differences. And there's no reason for developed countries to abandon what they have given schools and then return to purely what you can learn with a stick in sand. That's what we're trying to do, actually. Honestly, in Britain, here in New York, we're doing this. And the second thing, I think, a global thing, we're in an age that we've been deprived of dreams of education. You know what education we need global right now? Is someone like a Mandela, like I said, someone is who can dream, who said, yes, we can do this. I hope that either through 3.0 is promoting a dream that allow people to think education can be different. I mean, we have been, as researchers, have been kind of bashing the idea of a factory model or education for a long time. But really, no one has come to say, so we can do it. You get a lot of politicians or the bureaucrats still taking that view to say, yes, we can measure everything about education. We can track down everybody. We can squeeze people by holding them accountable so they can work harder. I have this analogy, again, and I don't go to church, but I always think church is a good idea. If you go to a church, people go there, a lot of people go to church, all kinds of church, synagogue, anything. We spend a lot of time there, but we don't hold the church accountable. You never go ask, does this church send more people up there or down there? We don't do that, right? And which church has saved more souls? I think education in the long run is really a faith-based thing. You can assess instruction. You can assess memorization of knowledge, but you can not assess whether this event will be useful in the long run or not. Education, you cannot find the bottom line easily. So I'm hoping a global agenda through this kind of effort is to allow people to be able to dream again, to return a dream, a vision to education, to say, yes, we can.
I'm interested that both of you talk in the language of faith and dreams. And yesterday, Ameeta, I think, cited Mahatma Gandhi as a kind of the voice almost, the descriptor of this way of thinking. And you might well ask why Cisco, a global company, thinks about these things. And I think there is a connection. I mean, above all, whether it's faith-based or not, we see everyone with a right to the opportunities and the right to flourish that only education can bring. More than that, I think we're perhaps slightly more self-interested, at least in this sense, that we would like to see right around the world, in all those 170 countries where we work, young people who are prepared for the challenges of working on some of the world's toughest problems in a global technology company. So there's that as well. But I suppose we should just come back a little, and I might come back to you, Yong, to say, looking at the schools that you see, let's say in the US, in Michigan, where you work, how far off are they? I mean, do you have the sense that those young people are coming through this 14 or 15-year experience without any of the skills that they really need? And what are those skills?
Well, actually, let me start from the school. I've seen many different schools. I went through a one-room schoolhouse, really, with mixed grades in the countryside in China there. What got me out of there is this dream. Actually, I was able to read letters received from one of my brother-in-laws. He was stationed in a faraway city. I just said, there's something beyond those mountains. Now, I think in Michigan now, if you come to Michigan, we have deprived kids of that. We're telling you, at third grade, you are at risk because you cannot read this paragraph as the state required. So it's not only about skills, it's the passion that's been deprived. Of course, in Michigan, another sad thing is about technology. Look, not only Michigan, in the U.S., many states don't do writing assessment using computers. Therefore, teachers force children not to write with a computer. They have to write with paper and pencil. Teachers wouldn't accept homeworks typed on the computer. In this day of, in the U.S., how can you do that? So I think in our schools, again, we are driving our children away from those skills. If you think about those skills, I would count as, of course, the traditional critical thinking, problem solving, but more broadly, empathy, to feel for other people, and the ability to create. And how about the ability to think differently? People always think creativity is a cognitive skill. Actually, I think it's purely psychological. Do you think you can be different? Another thing is about the global companies. How many of them can be like this? We can travel any places in a cultural competence. I don't feel nervous wherever I'm being. But that's something a lot of people don't have that in Michigan. So I think global competence, the digital abilities, and the ability to feel for other people, of course, being able to analyze information in different ways. I don't think most of our schools are doing that. Our schools are chasing after the superficial test scores, which is actually, in a way, counterproductive to education.
And there are you and I talking about the schools of America and the UK. And I guess we have quite a traditional image. The buildings may have improved in recent times, but nevertheless, we have a sense of what that school looks like. And yet, when I've travelled in India, Ameeta, it's a very, very different world. And, over 1 billion people in your country, and many of them, frankly, would be delighted to go to any kind of large school with proper resources, teachers, and one thinks as much as anything of small groups of kids, maybe in slum cities, hoping the teacher shows up today. Yes. So what are the skills that the young people in those settings really require as they look out into the 21st century?
Firstly, I'd like to say that, there was this huge hierarchical structure that was there in terms of the way we would look at education. And maybe at some point it was charismatic. But there's been, as a sociological term, there was a routinization of charisma. Yeah. So you have to sort of re-look at that and say, where do you go from here? Because then even that charisma just loses itself and the children get lost in it. And so there's been a huge explosion of the way we're looking at education today. With the new minister coming in, the idea of private school, getting in 25% of the poorest of the poor into the school system by the Right to Education bill that has come up in India today. That gives a tremendous amount of opportunity to those slum children who are within the periphery of those private schools. And there are hordes of private schools in the country which are very huge fee-taking. And I think it is their moral responsibility. Because ultimately it's about ethics. Education is also about ethics. It's about the way you look at life. And so if a private school is there for whatever it's worth, then it's important that it becomes a part in putting itself into nation building. And so if 25% of children within that metro come into the different private schools, automatically there'll be so much of skill development because they will be meeting with children who in a certain sense are privileged but will also be having the same kind of structure and facilities which may not be there currently in a government school. But having said that, we are also reworking the way primary education should be. Children between the ages of 6 and 14 are going to be brought into school systems because, as you rightly said, there are systems which have not been working very well. And they have been looking now at formative education more than summative education. There's not so much emphasis given to pen paper testing, but to see children at their own pace, how they function, how they work, how does one look at how do they multitask. And you can do this through projects. You can do it through excursions. You can do it through the kind of work they do hands-on with craft or with mud or with pottery. Because ultimately, these are the things that are going to help them get a vocation. Because there's no point of having unemployable graduates. Because that's not what we want. And India is always in the Guinness Book of Records. It has the largest amount. China, I'm sure, is bigger. But the point here is, in a certain sense, I think both of us are always in the Guinness Book of Records for the largest amount of everything. So we do have the largest amount of graduates, but we also have the largest amount of unemployable graduates. But that's not what we're looking at. We're looking at systems where every child is able to move at its own pace and get some kind of a livelihood which gives him a dignity and self-esteem. And that's the kind of education we're looking at.
That's something actually I was going to ask you. I think it's tremendous that Cisco is doing this, helping, trying to play a part in formulating a global view or vision to do this. What do you think Cisco might do in the future, or other corporate companies will do? Because I know, in general, we have this view that the corporate leaders don't really understand education. They're trying to, implement the business model into education. So, do you think we'll have a harmonious way with education sector, business sector, and the political sector converge to produce something? And what do you think Cisco can do in that regard?
Well, I think the challenge for a company like Cisco is to do more than simply show up in the offices of superintendent of schools around the world, whether it's China or India or the US or the UK, and say, what do you want to do? Have we got a box? Have we got a network for you? I think it's about working together to shape a vision and a roadmap for education through the 21st century, which actually reflects the diversity of these challenges. And then, of course, it will be important to develop, from a Cisco point of view, technical architectures, technical offerings that can support those visions. But I have felt personally very challenged in this meeting, as I'm having this conversation with you two today, in terms of a vision which was, if you like, created in the developed world, Education 3.0, forgive the term. Is it really relevant at all right around the world, in emerging countries, in some of the poorest countries in the world? As I think about it, I think the answer is yes, because at its core is not fancy systems of accountability or how governments restructure themselves. At its core is a very new approach to teaching and learning, using complex technologies, yes, but technologies which are easy to use, handheld. They really can be quite homespun. And I believe that idea of new teaching and learning and the way that teachers would enable learners to use that, actually, of course you have to shape it a bit, is as vitally important in every part of the world as ever it was in the UK where I first thought about these things. So I would want to put that on the table, but I'd like to end by linking back to something that came up earlier. Faith, values. There has to be a worry that for all our sense of individuation and not wanting technology to automate, somehow the emphasis has got too economic. It's about skills. It's about skills for economic growth.
For sure.
And I'm just wondering whether either of you can conceive or even reshape what I've called Education 3.0 to show how 21st century skills, if that's the word at all, can actually embrace that wider world, the ethical dimension, the values dimension, because without that, this will not be a global program. So shall I start with you, Ameeta, on the faith and values issue?
No, I think you're absolutely right, because after all, why are we being educated in the first instance? We're being educated so that we can live decent lives. We can have families. We can carry on sort of the world in a certain sense. That is the legacy that education gives us. And I don't think it's about only school. It's about lifelong learning, as I've mentioned earlier. So it's consistently going to be a part of our system, which means Cisco is going to be there forever. This is the way I mean, because ultimately if that is what learning is about, in a certain sense, that's what I say, that there are corporates that come in and they shouldn't just come in and walk away. Then they become part of it's a holistic learning system. Everybody sort of is involved and nurtures everybody towards an empowering system of education. So having said that, what I feel is that why are we saying that ethics or values or faith is something separate from a skill? Why are we saying that? That it is so integrated, because ultimately a skill that you have, whether it is a thinking skill or whether it is a social skill or whether it's just a hands-on skill of making a piece of clay, even that requires certain values of patience, of perseverance, of understanding, of concentration, or a certain reflective meditation. All these are involved in all the skills that we require to educate ourselves. Even if I go to a maths lab and I'm learning the skills of mathematics in a maths lab, I need to focus, I need to concentrate, I need to reflect. Are we saying that these are not value-based skills? So you cannot disengage yourself and say, that's a value, how is it going to be a part of this? As far as I'm concerned, skill is a value. And we don't have to put, we don't have to say that we put our money on that skill. But yes, jolly good. You put your money, you got it.
Let's end with you. I mean, there you are. 1 foot in China, 1 foot in America, the great giants of economic growth. They're soon, no doubt, to be joined again by India. How do you see this broader idea of skills plus values?
Well, first, actually, back to the idea of technology. I think people in education often are kind of suspicious of technology, like you said, automation. But actually, the reason we invent all this technology is to automate stuff, to make certain things more efficient and more effective. We've been doing that all the time. Like, a building is a technology. We come here. The unfortunate consequence is that you don't all get all the good things from technology, get bad things. There's no good without evil. It's always connected. So that's where it comes to the value idea. How do we deal with this? I think technology has transformed our society so dramatic in that we have to rethink about our values. But the values are fundamental. They can be universally spread. For example, human beings biologically, genetically, we have evolved to deal with a pack of 12. Any more than 12 people, we have a hard time dealing with. And now imagine technology brings us to all kinds of people here. In our little cave, we used to live with 12 people. That's easier to handle. Now, that's how we deal with human beings. That's why you talk about demonization, value others, the rise of fundamentalists. I mean, look at the human cost. It's huge. I think one value we need to talk about is universal value is about the cherished human life, respect individual desire and wishes. So those has not been really taught in our school. Another thing is really about the interdependence. Ameeta talks a lot about is our well-being is dependent on the well-being of others. We have no rights to tell the Indians, don't drive a car because you are driving the gas price up. I like to pay less. We can't tell the Brazilians, don't cut on the tree and kind of grow coffee beans because we want the Amazon forest to be there. But the Brazilians have the same rights as the Chinese do. So we want to live in the air-conditioned home as well. So that's where I think, how do we interpret interdependence, not as competition, but rather as the need, as the reason to reinvent, to continue to change our society, to find better technologies until we can't find it anymore. But so far, sometimes I praise creativity. Sometimes I curse creativity. Without creativity, our Earth will be much more sustainable. But now, since we have got on the ship, we got to continue to sail it. When we can only save ourselves is through more creativity.
Well, we can't do much better than that. I just say that we begin with education. We quickly realize it's a global endeavor. It's much to do with the whole way forward for human society across the planet. Thank you very much for joining us here in New York. Thank you very much for contributing to our global series. And please stay heavily involved as founder members of the Global Education Leaders Program.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.